Hi friends, I'm Jeffy G. Every once in a while you find some drum apps that are the golden nuggets of the marketplace. Multi-sampled, velocity layered drum apps, and they sound wonderful. Let's take a look and I'll explain why they're so good. Now, I'm not sponsored by any of these vendors, so you're getting my honest opinion. You could start off with any of these 4 drum apps and get excellent sounding drums. The first instrument is Blueprint by Fractured Sounds. It's a contact instrument, so you need contact 7 player, which is free, or in my case, I'm running it in contact 8. There's 28 different drum sounds. There is only one kit. I've done a more thorough review of Blueprint and all of their free instruments, and there's a link up above, and there's one in the description. Give you an idea of some of the sounds. It's got regular snares, but it's also got a roll. Very handy. The controls are fairly simple on this. It has a punch control, which boosts up the kick and snare. Hype is a combination of compression and a preset EQ. Dampening, it lowers the amount of ringing of some of the drums. And stereo width is kind of obvious. And then I'm going to go over these mic mix options. The mic mix options are pretty cool. It has a spot mic, an overhead mic, and a room mic. So when I play this MIDI sequence, I'll put it on spot and you'll hear how dead sounding that can be. If I add the overheads, and if I add the room, we'll get a lot of natural reverb. There are a couple more settings. You can control the sample start. This adjusts for latency. The higher you turn up the sample start, the less latency. Velocity response controls the degree to which playing the drums is sensitive to velocity. So if you're playing it on a keyboard or a pad, you want increased velocity sensitivity, you turn this up. If you take a look at the market leaders in drum software, you'll find it's quite expensive. And on close examination, you'll realize they're really in the business of selling you additional kits and expansions, which can range anywhere from $50 to $150 each. So by the time you buy the base product plus some drum kits, you're looking at a $400 or $500 investment. So my quest has been to find inexpensive, affordable programs that match that type of quality. A good 75% of all the drum apps that are on the market are really single sample players. For example, they'll play back a snare at different velocities or different volumes, but it's the same sounding snare. Whereas in a real drum kit, the snare actually sounds different the harder you hit it. That's why multi-sampling is so much more realistic. The second kit I recommend is the Abe Laboriel Jr. Drums by Spitfire Audio. It does play some patterns and there's 11 kits. Changing the kit. Increasing the reverb a little bit. Funky beats. Here's the 11 kits. The main drum kit is this, and it comes delivered with a variety of controls. This big button in the middle controls how much reverb. This slider controls the intensity. This one controls the dynamics, the volume of the dynamics. If you look closely at the keyboard layout, it has the same 1.5 octave assignment of drum kit pieces twice. So you can play it with your left hand and your right hand, which comes in handy if you're trying to do some complicated fills. Down at the bottom here, you've got reverb, kick volume, snare volume, hi-hat volume, and the snare type. As you increase this slider, it goes through different snare types. Much like the last drum instrument from Blueprint, there are mic settings in this one as well. There's a closed mic, a room mic, and something called hype. As you play through these, you can adjust the sound of the room, the ambiance, and the degree of compression and EQ. So if I turn off the room and the hype and just go with the closed sound, you'll hear it has a fairly dead beat. And if I add the room, I'm going to get a bit more ambiance of the reverb in the room. Because this instrument has so many samples, it does use a fair bit of CPU. And if you look at the top here, you have an indicator of how much CPU, disk, and memory is being used, as well as how many sample voices are actually being played at any point in time. You can also control the MIDI channels, which is great, especially if you have a multi-channel setup. The tuning of the entire kit, panning left to right. You can MIDI map any of the controls by right-clicking and assigning them to a controller on your MIDI controller or pad device. The Abe Laboriel Jr. drums was actually the first multi-sampled velocity layered drum kit I got because of its low price. Somebody recommended it to me and said, look, you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars. Just try this out for 29 bucks and you'll be really impressed. This has been a staple for me ever since. The next drum kit is called Handy Drums by Goran Grooves. I really like what these guys have done. The sampling quality is top-notch. There are 14 kits available. Each has some unique capabilities or a genre specific like jazz, rock, heavy metal, world percussion. Lots to choose from. These kits are all mix ready. That's why you see this mixer metaphor. There are both drums and percussion. Each kit also has percussion instruments, and in total, there's 42 kit pieces in each kit. That's a lot of different drum sounds. So let's just listen to some of the percussion as an example. So everything you've heard so far is just from one of the kits. Now there's some great features in Handy Drums. The ability to save presets, modify your mix. There is the ability to map each of the drum sounds to a particular key. One of the features I like the best is their MIDI loop browser. So this is everything I've been looking for. It has some great features, and I made another video on this, which is linked up above and in the description to go through the full explanation of how this works. But what I like about it is that it's generic, and you can browse drum MIDI files, not just the 100 they give you from Goran groups, but things that you might have in your private library. We can preview, and it will actually walk through a lot of the previews one at a time. It's got a lot of features that aren't obvious at first, but you can loop any of these before you drag them into your DAW. You can change the timing, the MIDI, the quantization, and the BPM. The last drum app is OneShot by Klevgrand from Sweden. And this might be my favorite, and I would argue that this might be the best. It comes with a lot of preset drum kits. They're organized into categories like jazz, funk, experimental, percussion, and electronic. These are very realistic drums delivered in a creative environment, which is a workstation. And it's preloaded with a lot of presets, but it's designed for you to be able to load your own multi-samples and create your own kits. Here's a modern kit. OneShot is made up of slots and triggers. Each one of these blocks is a slot, and within that slot you've got all of the samples. You can control on the outside the pitch, the pan, and 1 and 2 sends, the level by a slider here. But if you click on edit, you're going to see all of the samples that are making up this bass drum. And they are in velocity order. So you can see this is multi-sample, velocity layered. And any one of those samples, you can tweak the start and end of the sample. You can modify things like the normalization, mono, swapping left and right, and whether there are round robins being applied or not. So try to imagine that every one of these slots, which is a different kit piece, is made up of multiple samples. Now you can swap out a sample as well. If I click on load, I have an assortment of bass drums that I can choose. If I'm not happy with that one, I can choose this one. If you start with an empty drum kit, you can create a new slot. You can select samples from their library. So let's say I want a particular snare, 70s snare, and it'll populate that slot, and you can build your own kit. As soon as you load a slot, it assigns it to a trigger. You can see down here at the bottom, it's assigned this to C2. You can drag and drop that to any MIDI note you want. Each trigger has its own properties, which is how the sound is going to be played. There's a choice of 3 envelopes where you can control things like gain, pitch, and frequency. If we take a look at a preset, we see that we've got a bunch of slots already populated as a preset and a bunch of triggers that have already been defined. And on each trigger, there are envelope parameters. Now on each slot, you've got a send 1 and a send 2. You can set up those sends to these particular buses. So you've got here bus 1 and bus 2. Bus 1 has reverb and a gate. Bus 2 has reverb and a delay. And there's a variety of effects that can be applied at different places within the workstation for OneShot. You've got EQ, compression, gate, reverb, delay, some things that you're familiar with, distortion and bit crusher, stereo spread, things you might not expect. You can send those effects as part of bus processing, or you can assign them specifically to the slot. At this point, you should be getting the idea that this is a very powerful tool. It is both a player, a sampler, and a workstation. Every slot can have chokes. Each choke is assignable to have one sound silence another, and it's managed by this matrix. You can increase the amounts of the choke, the timing, and the velocity. I hope you're getting the idea. There really is nothing else on the market this creative and this flexible. This tool can give you the results of the best possible drum kit sounds, and it's not limited to just acoustic. There's a good assortment of percussion, distortion, experimental, and electronic drums all built into this. Now, a few other things. Every slot is a channel. Mixer parameters and multi-output routing are all supported. The effects apply not just to the buses and the slots, but also to the main output. To my way of thinking, this is the most complete and flexible drum app I've ever seen before. And the creators at KlevGR have a great sense of humor, and they think of things in different ways than we've traditionally thought of drum apps and drum software. It's great value for money. This could be the one app that you stick to for a long time. Not only does it run on Mac and Windows, but it's also available for iOS. Those very common single sample players for drum sounds will do the trick for most things. They're particularly strong with electronic music and hip hop, where the drums can be a lot more affected or processed. But if you're doing rock, indie, things that have jazz, funk, and R&B in them, you probably want more realistic sounding drums. And in that case, these 4 applications are going to sound a lot more realistic. So you don't have to spend a fortune to get excellent sounding drums. And if you found this video useful or interesting, click on the like button. Consider subscribing to the channel. Thanks for watching.